population is, if you feel your population is very generous, ask them for all of them at one time, or ask them for all of them in different questions on a ballot. But Christy is cringing, I can see that. But it's, you know, that's a big ask. So Summit County did it successfully, one question at a time over a period of 12 years, 13 years, maybe 15. So we can ask for but we have to go to the voters for the taxing. That then requires, to the last part of your question, one, you need to have a nexus study done, because you need to be able to show that there's a nexus between what you're asking for in the tax dollars and the impact you expect it to have. So you couldn't just randomly say, I think this year, without a housing problem, we're going to ask the voters for funding. That you need to have that nexus study to tie those two together. And then depending upon, well, if it's a multi-jurisdictional, which has this power, then it's the board of directors of the housing authority that craft the language and register that language with the elections officer in your county. And there's a whole set of rules and timing that go along with just plain getting the question on the ballot. But that is a direct responsibility of the taxing authority. So that fell onto the housing authority to do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And then Lori, can you speak about the town of Breckenridge's housing authority and your ability to access bonds and provide tax exemptions?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to the countywide housing authority that the town is part of, because it's multi-jurisdictional, we also have a town of Breckenridge specific housing authority. And we have used that town of Breck housing authority for a lot of things. Specifically, it provides the property tax exemptions for projects, which helps to get a project to pencil. We've also used it to access some short-term bonds, which provides the supports the developer in getting permanent financing, because there's asset there, the bonds. We have never used it, and I don't believe we have the authority to use the town of Breck housing authority for a tax.
Is that because the multi-jurisdictional
Pardon me?
housing? Sorry, Lori, this is Christy. Is that because the multi-jurisdictional housing authority already has the tax in place and the two can't do the same things?
No, I don't think it's, I think it's just the multi-jurisdictional housing authority does specifically by statute have the authority to tax for some reason. The town of Breck one was created under a different statute. And if you look at the authority under the statute that was created under, it doesn't have any taxing authority, which is interesting. And so, you know, you'd want to talk to legal counsel, obviously, about, it sounds like you guys are thinking about a multi-jurisdictional housing authority or a single jurisdiction housing authority.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Chris, can you talk to us a little bit about your board makeup and how you try to achieve community representation on your board so that you're representing the folks that you're trying to serve?
Yeah, so we have, our board is made up of one elected and then one position chosen by each municipality or the county. So we've got the Crested Butte, Mount Crested Butte, Gunnison, and county each has one elected on there, and then either a second elected individual or someone at large in the community in which is representing them. Oftentimes these I'll say at large positions are real estate agents or people involved in development, something that they're really bringing something to the table. The other thing that we've also, I'll say, encouraged in some cases, like Mount Crested Butte, it was for a long time their community development director was their elected, second elected individual on there. But we're encouraging their involvement from each municipality, whether they have a voting board seat or not, because that is where a lot of the communication happens. And having them roped in and part of that board and part of those discussions is pretty key.
And I neglected to allow our elected officials to introduce themselves. If we could go ahead and do that, and then we'll open this up to questions.
I can start. This is Greg Lobby, Mayor of Leadville. I do apologize. There's planning and zoning starts at 6, so I'll enjoy as much of this as I can, and then I'll have to sign off.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Mudge, one of the county commissioners here in Lake.
And Jeff Fiedler, one of the county commissioners.
I thought I saw Cisco on, but I don't see him anymore. How about county staff, if Lori and Tim and Jackie?
I am Jackie Wheelahan. I am the new housing director.
Tim Bergman, I'm the county manager.
And I'm Lori Simonson. I'm the Leadville City Administrator.
Chris Floyd, I serve as the appointed county attorney.
Hey, can y'all hear me? This is Cisco.
Yes,
We can hear you now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Hi, Cisco Tharp, City Council.
Excellent. So let's open this up. If any of you have questions that you would like to ask our very important guests, let's go for it.
I have a question about the streamlining the permitting process and that conversation between jurisdictions and how the housing authority or how the jurisdictions had those conversations, and did they create new policies or code, or yeah, how did that work to create an incentive in the permitting process?
Sarah, what kind of incentive program are you talking about? You mean incentivizing development, trying to find private sector partners?
Yeah, and so I saw on a presentation, one thing listed as a power or a role of the housing authority was streamlining permitting, which the housing authority doesn't do the land use permitting. So what does that exactly mean?
Just to chime in real quick, because I think Lori probably has the best answers for this question, but this housing authority does not have any say over permitting processes. Those are all internal to our member jurisdictions. And so we don't get involved with setting up any policy or procedure around that.
Yeah, and I would say kind of along the same lines, the Summit Combined Housing Authority doesn't get involved with streamlining development review processes. That's all left to the individual jurisdiction, whether it's Breckenridge or Dillon or Silverthorne or Frisco. They would do the review of a plan. And the individual jurisdictions also do a lot of the sort of partnerships with developers, like the town of Breck can work with a variety of partners support a development, to incentivize a development. But none of that is actually funneled through the housing authority, either the Summit Combined Housing Authority or our Town of Breck Housing Authority. So there may be powers in the authority that we just haven't taken advantage of to do that kind of incentivizing, but we haven't had to because most of it's done at the jurisdiction level. And a lot of it is done at the jurisdiction level.
Yeah.
Lori, this is Greg. That makes perfect sense, but do you make recommendations for possible streamlining and code changes?
Relative to the jurisdiction's processes?
Maybe specific to their processes, yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, I work for the Town of Breck. I don't work for the Housing Authority. So I work for the Town of Breck. And as managing the Town of Breck program, we're constantly looking at ways to eliminate barriers to the development of affordable housing, to seek opportunities for partnerships. We use development agreements a lot as the town to work through if there's code issues that we want to provide a waiver on a certain code issue to facilitate an affordable housing project. We can do that through a development agreement. And then they can pursue the development through the Town of Breck entitlement process. So all of that's done basically at the jurisdiction level, not at the housing authority level in our world.
Yeah. And Mayor, we have made recommendations to our member jurisdictions if we're starting to work on a particular project. We have made recommendations, not necessarily for their development process, but we act as a review agency for projects that have any sort of affordable housing component in them. And it's extremely important that you bring the housing authority in. If you're going to have them do any work for you after you build the project, that you bring them in from the ground floor. And we have a perfect example going on right now where we were kind of in at the ground floor of here's an idea we have for a parcel of land, and here's a neighborhood we're going to build. And then we didn't hear anything until they said, oh, it's time to sell phase 1 next month. We didn't know what we were selling. It was in a floodplain. We didn't have lenders that had reviewed the deed restriction fully yet because they changed it. And all of that complicates the end process. So I think it's really important if you're going to have a housing authority, whether it's a multi-jurisdictional or not, involved in the process of getting these units online and getting them to the end user, that you're talking to them from the beginning and you have their input on what's going to make the process, their part of the process, easier, more understandable for the community and for your end user. So it's not necessarily telling you how to operate your development review process, but it's making sure that you've engaged the housing people in the discussion from the beginning.
I totally agree with what Jennifer's saying. Right before this call, I was talking with the executive director of the Summit Combined Housing Authority. Up until about 2 minutes before I jumped on this call, there's constant interaction as a jurisdiction within that Combined Housing Authority. And we may be a little bit different here in Summit because our housing authority, our Combined Housing Authority, doesn't do development. They do programs. They do a lot of contract for services for the jurisdictions. They do, the income testing, the approval of buyers, all that sorts of stuff, but they don't do a lot of the actual development of housing units. That is mostly done by the individual jurisdictions, whether it's Summit County government, Town of Breck government, Silverthorne, Frisco. So we may be a little bit different from a lot of housing authorities like down in Denver, where the housing authority is doing 90% of the development.
Right. And we're the same way. We're not a developer here. And in establishing your housing authority and your plan moving forward, this is really something that you need to drill down on and get a very clear decision that you all can support over the long term is, do you want your housing authority to be a developer, or do you want them to manage and administer all the programs that go along with putting affordable housing in your community? Because it's not once you build it, you walk away and you're done. That's the developer's role. They build it, they walk away, they're done, and you're stuck with that development, whether it's rental or for sale, you're stuck with that forever. So it's really important when you're crafting what you want your housing authority to be, to decide, do we want them to be a developer, or do we want them to be an administrator of, sorry, there we go. An administrator, assist in the development and then and help facilitate it, but then at the back end, take care of the lifelong relationship you're all going to have with that property. Because there's very different skill sets that you need in the housing authority capacity if you're going to be a developer. That's very different than if you're going to be an administrator and facilitator.
Yeah, our housing authority, like I mentioned, we primarily use them. We contract with them to do tons of services for us. We use their property tax exemption. That's super important. So we will involve the housing authority as having a small ownership interest in some of the projects that we are facilitating. But we have, like Jennifer said, haven't to date used them as a primary developer. And that's a totally different set of skills.
Mm-hmm. That is another thing that we have done since we're not a developer. And why don't we let Cisco ask his question so that in case Cisco, ask your question.
Oh, thank you. It's not on that topic exactly. So if you want to finish that and then come to me, you can.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I was wondering what your staff configuration and org chart are like, and just imagining like what kind of staffing we would need here in Leadville. And I'm sure it varies based on what we're trying to do and the scope of work. But yeah, at some point, could you speak to that, please?
So you're talking about the staffing for the housing authority entity itself. And I think that kind of depends on, like Jennifer was saying, what are you going to task your housing authority with doing? Is it going to be doing, programs and Section 8 and employee qualifications, buyer qualifications, or is it going to be development? Because that's going to determine how you staff your housing authority. If you're talking broader, just like housing programs, I can tell you from the town of Breck perspective, we have a 5-person housing division now. It used to be a 1-person housing division for years and years. But we have a 5-person housing division. I manage it. We have one person that oversees development projects. We have another person that oversees programs, the incentive programs like the housing helps and the buy downs. We have a couple people that work on monitoring and oversight because like Jennifer said, you build it, but then it's yours to oversee and to manage in perpetuity. And then we have a person that works a little bit on outreach and public communication around the housing program. So we basically have a 5-person staff now.
And Lori, pardon me if you said this, but are you doing development? Is your authority doing development?
I am part of the town of Breck, not the housing authority. I'm part of the Summit Combined Housing Authority, and the Summit Combined Housing Authority does not do development. And I don't think Jennifer's housing authority does development either.
Correct.
Okay. And are those staff employees of the authority or employees of the city, or what's their affiliation?
It can happen one of two ways. And while I'm talking, I'm pulling up our organizational chart for our housing authority, which would be very similar probably to Summit Combined. You could do it one of two ways. Here in Gunnison, the employees of the Housing Authority are employees of the Housing Authority. And so it is our own, it's our own payroll. We have our own HR, which is the executive director, because we're not very big. I have a total of 4 employees full-time, including myself. And I don't know, I have up on my computer, and Jackie, I don't know if you can make me host or what, to show it to you, but we have a total of 4 employees, and we run several different programs with the 4 employees, and we are employees of the Housing Authority. And when I was in Summit County, and it could have changed since then, but when I was in Summit County, we were employees of the county, and we had an MOU between the county and the Housing Authority. So we were kind of employees on loan from the county to the Housing Authority. It streamlined all of the HR and payroll processes, which was very beneficial. And that might be something that you want to consider. You know, it does have another layer of just another layer of admin and management, but it is one way to do it depending upon what your resources look like for handling payroll and HR stuff.
Thank you. Thank you both for speaking to that.
I'll send Jackie our organizational chart and she can share it with you.
I did make you host if you want to do it now.
Oh, sorry, Jackie, should I hop in or hold on? I had a question about the financial contributions from the member jurisdictions of a multi-jurisdictional housing authority. You had mentioned that, and I was curious if that was sort of set up in the founding IGA, or is it just something that happens every year as part of each jurisdiction's budget allocation, and you're almost coming to them like a department? And then also sort of delving into that, is it, however it was set up, okay, yeah, so if it's like a set percentage or a set amount that's like indexed over time. So yeah.
You can talk probably more about this, Jennifer, but from the Summit Combined Housing Authority, as I understand it, the Housing Authority does an annual budget, and the member jurisdictions contribute towards covering that budget. And then the balance of the sales tax revenue that was collected in a certain jurisdiction goes to that jurisdiction.
Can you say that very last part again?
Sure. So say the Housing Authority generates X amount of dollars annually through the sales tax. The first thing that comes out of that is the cost to cover the Housing Authority's budget. And then the balance of the sales tax is distributed to the participating jurisdictions based on the amount that was collected in each jurisdiction. So for us, you know, we get a big share of it because a lot of the sales tax that's collected through that Housing Authority tax is generated in the town of Breck, the sales tax. Mm-hmm. So it's just distributed amongst the jurisdictional members based on their share of tax generation.
Correct. The IGA for the Summit Combined Housing Authority, which was drafted back in 2006, so it's been there for a long time and possibly could have changed. That was done on a percentage of each jurisdiction had a very specifically odd percentage that they would pay. Like Breckenridge was 26.93%. I don't know where the 93 came or the 26. And somebody told me one time that was based on the amount of work that each jurisdiction anticipated the Housing Authority to perform on their behalf. Here in Gunnison, we have a fixed dollar amount for each jurisdiction to contribute. And all the two towns up north and the city of Gunnison are all at the same level. I think they're at 58,750 per year. And the county is at 93.5. The county is paying us more because we do more for them, mostly in property management and some of the other services, just because they had properties that need more direct attention than say a for sale deed restricted product would that was in one of the towns.
It would probably be helpful for us to forward you a copy of the IGA from the Summit Combined Housing Authority. And we could also send you a copy of the Housing Authority's budget.
That would be great. Thank you.
And if I haven't sent it, Jackie, I can, or Christy.
Sarah, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I had a follow-up on the conversation about the housing authority being developers. Were you not developers because of capacity or because the jurisdictions had the ability to navigate that already? And have you come across any circumstances where you think that I don't know, it's been a detriment for the housing authority not to be the developer, or can the housing authority, I think you referred to the housing authority folding in some advantages and with a jurisdiction or through a development?
Well, that's a great topic, Sarah. Here's my take on that is, and one of the considerations that Chris and my board, Michael was on my board at the time too, I think, the conclusion we came to, if we're developers, first of all, it would be somebody besides me because I don't have development experience. Secondly, you're probably focused on one project at a time. Before I got to Gunnison, my predecessor spent 3 or 4 years doing almost nothing but putting a 30-unit LIHTC apartment building in Crested Butte. And thank God he did. It's a lifesaver up there. But that's all that got done during that time period. If you're Denver Housing Authority, you probably have 20 people just in your development department alone. So a lot of it comes down to, what do you want your housing authority to do for you? Where are you gonna, how much money do you want to put into it? Where are you gonna get the biggest bang for your buck? What kind of capacity do you have to have just an authority that does nothing but development? Because trust me, and I think Lori can speak to this because she has built more affordable housing than almost anybody I know. That's a full-time job in and of itself. So to do that and then take care of all of the after-birth sorry, maybe shouldn't call it that, but after-birth administration that comes once you've built the project, you're gonna find yourself stretched really thin, particularly if you are a small housing authority like I imagine Lake County might have.
Yeah, I would think, with Summit Combined Housing Authority, that's a large housing authority with 5 different jurisdictions. And I think the fact that our Summit Combined Housing Authority did not take on development for us was a good thing, because each of those municipalities felt strongly about what they wanted to build in their community. And it would have been very difficult to get all of the other jurisdictions, and we wouldn't probably have wanted the other jurisdictions weighing in on a project that we were doing in Breck. You just end up with, Breck likes to sort of say, this is what we need, this is what we want to target. And if it were being developed by a combined authority, then we'd have all those other jurisdictions weighing in and further complicating a project that we think we know what we want to build in our community. So I think when you get with big housing authorities with lots of different jurisdictions, you don't want to be in the business of trying to develop and figure out which jurisdiction is going to get which project and what it's going to look like. I think you leave that to the individual jurisdictions. But in your situation where you might not have that many jurisdictions, it would probably be pretty simple to coordinate and to take on that development role as a housing authority.
Yeah, I think in our situation, it would be a capacity issue and a bandwidth issue for sure. And then perhaps, we might run into the same thing because there's not a lot of vacant city property to develop. So I don't know. I mean, that's speculative.
Is, it's not necessarily us acting as developer, but us adding funding or support that leverages the private sector to do the development. That's our preferred method. We just adopted a 5-year blueprint where we expect over the next 5 years to actually invest about $50 million worth of financing and funding into housing. And that's going to leverage into 350,000 of private sector investment. We've got a project right now where we're building it's town-owned land. We're doing a land lease, but a private developer is going to do the vertical development. It's a $74 million project. The town is putting in $8 million. And so the private sector partner is generating the equity and the financing for the balance of that project. And we're doing just an $8 million loan. So it's not always about being the full-on developer. It might just be about being in it enough to leverage the private sector and encourage the private sector participation, because we can't get out of this housing solution with public funding only. We need the private sector to bring cash, to bring investment, to bring equity. So we really view our role as the town of Rec to leverage our housing fund and hopefully get 5 times that in terms of investment in the community.
So we kind of touched on this in our last joint meeting, but if we were not to specify authority to be a developer as a housing authority, the housing authorities can still participate in that process and leverage their resources. Okay, that's helpful because I think,
whether they're a developer or not, they have a role in that. For example, in that $75 million project, the housing authority will have a small bit of ownership in the development entity for the property tax exemption alone. And the housing authority will actually issue the short-term loans that are going to provide the collateral for the permanent financing so they can get the financing at a lower rate. So the housing authority, whether you're actually acting as the developer or not, you have a lot of opportunity to participate and to incentivize projects to happen.
Okay. And I have a couple more questions, but I'll let Michael ask his question.
No, well, and Sarah, certainly I don't need to hog up time. One asset that the Lake County and Leadville have is they have some land assets that they can bring to the table. So I think that's one of the big considerations that we've discussed. And I just wanted to ask, Sarah, I don't mean to, if you have questions, I certainly can let you ask. But one thing we talked about, and this one was actually to Chris, is about grievances and other procedures that board members are actively involved in. And maybe Chris, you could talk a little bit about that, because I think that was a big topic about trying to figure out who was the right fit for the board and number of members, et cetera. And I know the grievance committee when I was in Crestview was one of the big, that's housing's a real personal thing. And maybe Chris, you can touch on that for just a sec.
Are you asking as far as what is our policy is set as far as what that grievance board looks like when there is a grievance, or how's the housing authority plays that role?
I think for the electeds on the call, it would be helpful for you to share with them just some the experience and the importance of how that process unfolds, and just any advice you have to them as they consider their policies around that?
Yeah, geez. I mean, I'd definitely take a look at ours, and I can't think of exactly what it's actually been a little while since we've dealt with a grievance, which is nice. But being in your jurisdiction, you step forward on that grievance committee, overseeing the hearing. I will say it's, I mean, I have found that our process went pretty smooth, and I guess I'd say let's share that with them, Jennifer, as far as our bylaws for it. But off the top of my head, Michael, I can't remember exactly the setup, but I will say it is key that you have your individual members for each or your representative for each county stepping forward, each municipality stepping forward for their municipality to hear it. I think it brings it down to earth, and it builds trust with your community.
And I'll be happy to send our grievance and appeals policy to Jackie.
Thank you.
And that's something that we've worked on over time to continue to improve on.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, there's oddly been very few really serious demands for listening to a grievance and appeals. Everybody's behaving because there's no other housing to go to. So they have to behave so they can stay in their housing. So it's been kind of nice and quiet during COVID. If you can call that a benefit of COVID, I guess you can. My property manager thinks it is, but. And that was one of the things I was going to say earlier is, or speak to, is the Gunnison Housing Authority as a multi-jurisdictional has partnered with a third-party outside developers on a project. We've done one so far and anticipate some more. But we partnered as a special limited partner with a developer on a LIHTC project, and to provide that property tax exemption for as long as we're in that partnership. So, and we expect to be in it for 40 years, but we were able to do that. And then we were also able to loan $100,000 into their project at a decent rate of interest with a 17-year payoff. But that 100,000 helped them bridge a gap that got us 36 units in the city of Gunnison. And so that's very little money on our part for a very big payback. And that's what Lori's talking about, is that power of leveraging. It's hard to convince your voters if you are going to ask for a tax, and they say, oh, well, the tax will only raise a $1.2 million a year. So what's that going to build? That today could build you maybe two houses. But no, you can take that money and leverage it to, 5, 10, 20 times over what you're generating, because you do take that partnership role with developers. There is a project here that I wanted to get done before I left, and we're not going to get there. But it was what I call an opportunities menu. And I think I've talked to Christy about this before, but taking a look at all the land that you have in your jurisdictions, not just what you own personally, but all the lands that you have that would be suitable for housing and then suitable for affordable housing. Map those out, get an idea of, where they're based on where they're located, what type of housing would be best there, as far as what is it, rental or for sale, your income targets, is it going to be families or is it going to just be worker bees? Go through that whole exercise for each parcel. And then you can also put together some funding suggestions for it with this money that is literally raining down on us and nobody knows how to use it yet. And take that menu of opportunities to build out to developers who are looking for something to do. And they know how to go out and find the really big dollars, getting the CHAFA loans and getting getting all of the dollars that are designed for affordable housing. Let them do that legwork once you show them we have opportunities for you. And then if you've got any small dollars that you can put into the deal to leverage, that's always beneficial. And providing that property tax exemption is critical to long-term affordability of the project. And that is mostly used for rental projects.
Could you guys speak a little bit to the property tax exemption authority or ability that y'all have and how you actually apply that?
It's by statute. So because we had to kind of prove this to the developer that we got into the partnership with, it's just in Colorado state law that says if the housing authority has any ownership interest in the project, and we took a 0.01% in that project. So it's very tiny, no controlling interest or anything like that. But just that 0.01% naturally follows if we are involved in the deal and have that partnership interest in it. It just happens. So there's no special agreements that you have to sign. You don't have to get approval from the Department of Revenue or anybody else. It just happens that way. Seems a little odd. There should be something that everybody has to sign for it, but there really isn't. You do that through that partnership that you have
with the developer, and then that whatever the land. Okay.
Yeah, we've done that on almost all of our projects where either the Town of Breck Housing Authority or Summit Combined Housing Authority has a 0.01% interest in a lot of the LIHTC projects, because a town can't have any interest in a for-profit LLC, but a housing authority can. And so that was one of the reasons we created our Town of Breck Housing Authority, because the Town of Breck couldn't provide property tax exemption to a LIHTC project, but a housing authority could have interest in that ownership entity and thereby provide the property tax exemption.
Okay. And then how did like, for lack of a better way to explain it, how did you develop like that pro forma of what the formula might be for the jurisdictions contributing based on, I would imagine you might have done that or projected, okay, starting with a staff of 1 and we might get to 4 because we have X amount of developable land, or like what was that conversation?
The pro forma per project or the staffing?
Yeah, like in the creation of the housing authority.
How'd you come up with your staffing requirements? Well, I think, for example, the Town of Breck Housing Authority has 0 staff, no staff at all. It is an entity that doesn't actually do much except exist as an entity that can participate in projects. So, but the Summit Combined Housing Authority has a lot of staff because they do programs and they do services for the other jurisdictions. So I think depending on what your objectives are for your housing authority, you'll have to figure out what your staffing needs will be. Then you can figure out what the cost of having your housing authority is going to be and what you need to have in terms of revenue to sustain that annually.
Yeah, and just the last comment on that, it seems like maybe we need to incorporate a little bit more into conversation of not necessarily just what we want a regional or joint housing authority to look like, but what the existing housing authority's role might expand to be, if anything, and then go from there, because of the municipality's existing housing authority.
Right. And in order to answer your question, unfortunately, I wasn't at either Summit or Gunnison's birth at their genesis. So I wasn't privy to those conversations about how that dollar figure was arrived at. But I think if you want a ballpark figure of what number are we even thinking about here, start at $250,000. Most of your expenses are going to be in salaries because it is a service-driven organization. You're providing services as opposed to a product. So your highest expense is always going to be in your salaries and your benefits. But just thinking about where Summit was when I started there and where Gunnison was when I started here, I think for what you're looking for, if you have that $250,000 in your mind as that's a starting point, you should, it could be a really, it could be a relative starting point. It could be good for you, at least give you a ballpark.
And just to add a real quick on Jennifer, because it was right before you started that the towns increased their contribution. And that was a recognition of the additional programming and staff that we needed. And so we upped our contribution from the original contribution because it was before you were there, it was Carl and was Chris there before you? So I think it was staff of Chris, the employee. Yeah. And so so as programming and other things were added, the contributions, the IGAs changed and the contributions went up from each of the municipalities. For the Gunnison County, because we wanted more and we wanted more administration.
Right. And I think I think a good place, if I were to do it over again, a good place to start is one, figure out what you want your housing authority to do and what kind of staff you need to do that. And then you're going to absolutely faint when you look at what salaries are for housing authorities. They've gone up. But start with what you need to pay out, because you're going to have to present a balanced budget to the state auditor. So figure out what you're going to pay out, and then you back into what your revenue streams, where they're going to come from and what they need to be. If that's helpful.
Christy, you want to ask your question?
Thank you, Jackie. Last time the city and county were talking about grievances. One of the things that they mentioned was they were hoping maybe they could send grievances to the housing authority lawyer. Not like city or county legal, but like the housing authority lawyer to weigh in on before to give like a report to the grievance committee. And I was just curious, is that a thing? Or are we thinking along the right lines or not?
For your grievance and appeals committee, I would keep it just internal within your board. And I've had a really positive experience with my board members stepping up to be on that committee based on where the resident was and what the, like Chris said, if it's something in the town of Crested Butte, then we're going to have our Crested Butte board members sitting on that grievance committee to give that personal connection to the grievant, the person that's making the claim. Attorneys are very expensive. And so I try and use ours judiciously. And there are every final decision that we make gets run past the attorney, but I don't necessarily have them step in the beginning. The other times we don't even need to go down that road. Frequently, if you have a grievance and appeals process and the grievant understands it and they're aware of it, they know what's going to happen as far as the process goes. There are a lot of times you don't even need to come to a decision that you need an attorney to tell you, yes, you can go down this road. Frequently, you're going to come to a conclusion of, here's how we're going to get past this. We're going to provide more information to you. We're going to harass you less. You promise that you're going to take care of your unit and not destroy the outside of the building or whatever it is that they're doing. But frequently, you can reach a satisfactory agreement without even having to pay your attorney for doing that. But
Thank you.
that process is really important to have established.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And then I think the other thing while we're talking about attorneys is they're nearing being done with the community guidelines, which you helped us get a significant head start on. But then I think the plan is to have like an attorney who has legal expertise review them. And I'm not sure that we have any like leads for those types of folks. Is there a lot of housing attorneys in the state?
Lori, do you want to talk to that?
No, it's the bottom line. But I'm sure there are some, they just might not be local. I'm sure there are some firms in Denver that do this all the time. We're actually going through a pretty massive change in terms of our structure of our Town of Breck housing program in terms of codifying it. And our new attorney is, that's a focus of our new attorney. So we're going to have all sorts of authority that we didn't have before, like the authority to fine people for violating the covenant, as opposed to having to enforce it through civil court. Vail just got that sort of approved, and we're going to follow suit and create more structure around sort of just the organizational structure and the powers of our housing division.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, things that we learn over time.
Yes.
We use an attorney out of Montrose who had experience with the Telluride Housing Authority and a lot of just small local government experience. That's his area of focus, and it's served us pretty well.
Chris, do you want to speak to that?
I just wanted to say that I am working closely with the city attorney on these, and Christy, is as much as you would like the county to engage a housing authority expert attorney for this, as was mentioned by Lori, there aren't really that many of those. And frankly, I don't know that we're at a stage where we need that. This isn't rocket science. It's stuff that's, if you're experienced as I and Christiana McCormick are in interpreting statute, I don't think we necessarily need to incur the expense of bringing in a very expensive person from the Front Range who happens to be able to read the statutes too. So if we get to that point, though, rest assured that we will look for help if we don't feel like we have the expertise to address an issue.
Yeah, we've relied totally on our town attorney to go through the statute and help guide us as we created our Town of Breck Housing Authority, and as we have our relationship with the Summit Combined Housing Authority. The jurisdictional attorneys are awesome at handling that.
Well, thank you, Chris. That message had not been given to me yet, so I did not know that you guys felt good about that. last I had heard was that you were wanting some help on it. So I just had not been given that message yet.
The only place where we call in sort of special counsel is in dealing with if you're doing a complicated bond deal. You might want to have somebody that is very, very experienced with municipal bonding and that sort of stuff. But depending on what you guys do up there, that's the only time we've ever called in special counsel.
We're nearing the end of our time. Dan, did you have something to say?
No, only just to say thank you to everybody. Dan Osborne. I sit on the Leadville Housing Authority board, and just want to say thank you to everybody for this conversation and kind of hearing all the different perspectives. I did want to say, just quickly address Commissioner Mudge's comments on sort of the staffing and, sort of if we go down the road where the Leadville Housing Authority ends up sort of dissolving and then becomes reformed as the multi-jurisdictional housing authority, part of what we've tried to do over the last year is kind of stack our board a little bit with some subject matter experts. And then as our understanding was that Jackie's position would then sort of transition into that executive director of the housing authority, and we would provide that expertise to her. So some of that funding is already in place. And then our organization would also be able to bring in some additional dollars and staff resources as well as board resources if it were to go that way. And again, as you know, our position is we just want to continue to exist. If it ends up being a completely separate multi-jurisdictional housing authority, that might be a little bit different. We wouldn't be able to bring that same capacity.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate all of our experts' time tonight. It was very generous of you to spend this evening with us, and thank you so much. I did have one question that I wanted to ask that came up during our discussion yesterday, and it was about the appreciation cap for the guidelines. And Christy had mentioned, Lori, that you had done something with your appreciation cap and wished that you had done something differently. And I wanted for you to expand on that and let us know your experience and maybe what worked and what did not work.
Well, we've lived and learned for sure. I mean, our first deed restrictions had very, very generous appreciation caps. I think it was, we even had some old ones that allow 7% a year. It's ridiculous. Then, Wellington came on board, and I think that one is, for a while it was like 5% or AMI change, whatever's greater. I mean, our appreciation rates have been way too high, and as a result, the units have not stayed affordable to the initial income target. So I think there's a lot of different ways you can deal with your appreciation cap. You can go as far as Frisco's gone, which is, I don't know how that's going to actually work out, but their appreciation formula is if it was affordable to 80% at the time that you bought it, it has to be affordable to 80% at the time that you sell it, regardless of what's gone on with interest rates or AMI. So if you bought in a very high interest rate market, you could actually have to sell for less if the interest rates change substantially. So that's Frisco's appreciation rate, and obviously their goal is to keep it affordable to the initial AMI target. Obviously, we're not going to go that far because it could result in somebody having to sell for less than what they paid for it. So we did a ton of analysis on appreciation rates. In fact, we had Melanie Reese come in and look at like Wellington 1 and Wellington 2 to see what was driving price creep. Was it the real estate commission? Was it the capital improvements, or was it our appreciation formula? And they all three obviously contribute. But on appreciation rates, we looked at different options, and we ended up actually settling on a fixed 2%. We don't want to tie it to AMI anymore. We don't want to tie it to the greater of AMI or the lesser of AMI. So we ended up settling on fixed 2%. It's predictable. I think buyers appreciate it, lenders appreciate it. And over time, AMI, probably is going to go up on average 3% a year. So hopefully units will stay affordable if we fix the appreciation at 2%. But it's really a matter of kind of looking at your market and what incomes are doing in your market and what you need to do to keep them affordable to that same income target.
Excellent.
And I took the lessons learned, I'll say this real quickly. I took the lessons learned from in Summit County and all the work that Lori and the others there had done, and have recommended to our jurisdictions on new deed restrictions that they look at just going with a flat 2% cap, and then let the market tell you whether you can actually get that 2% or not, because that also depends on how well you treat your house. If you treat it like a, well, you know, if you take care of it, maintain it, then it's gonna be more marketable, and you'll probably realize that 2% appreciation. And we took a look at what the average increase in not just AMI, but in real wages were for Gunnison County, and tried, you know, are we above that? Are we below that? We're slightly above it at 2%. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but I think it's a far better formula for everybody than trying to do that greater than or lesser than formula. And the town of Crested Butte, before Michael got there, had a beautiful exercise in how complicated can we make appreciation formulas. So some of them have 7 different ways to calculate appreciation, and then you have to figure out which one they really want you to use. So don't do that. Keep it simple.
All right, excellent. We appreciate your time so much. Thank you, and good night.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Good
Thank
luck
you
with
so
it all.
much. Yeah. So
Don't go away far, Jennifer. I will call on you even though you're retired.
I was just going to tell you, I will be sending you my contact information, my real contact information later this week or next week. Okay. And I'll send it to you too, Lori.
Yes, please. Thanks. I get down your way every once in a while.
I sure appreciate you. Thank you so much.
See you guys.
Good luck.